Welcome to the right-wing wilderness. My name's Dan Flynn. I'm your host. I was thinking today that I'm going to call it the Dan rule, that every Republican not committed to not being John McCain ultimately becomes John McCain. And I'm worried that that's happened with Donald Trump. In recent weeks, he's been threatening to overthrow the government of Iran. He has overthrown, at least he's abducted the president arrested the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, brought a bunch of his cronies to the United States. To see Maduro within the span of 24 hours to get toppled, brought to the United States, and appear in a prison, I mean, that's with no American casualties. You can't really argue with success. I think Americans are kind of outcome-oriented people, and we'll get into more of that later. And so in Trump's first term, he ran as America First, MAGA foreign policy, no more regime change, endless wars, policeman of the world, all that stuff. The United States was going to stop doing that because it had cost us a lot of blood and treasure in Iraq and Afghanistan. People were sick of it. And they are, I don't know that Trump is all that sick of it now, because he seems to be doing that. He seems to be doing his John McCain, George W. Bush imitation. And the thing that got me, Maduro in court declaring, I am the president of Venezuela. I am the president of Venezuela. And he sort of was acting rebellious or imperious. And I guess that's, he's sort of an imperious guy. So he's going to act that way. It reminded me, do you ever see the Woody Allen movie Bananas? There's a moment where Woody Allen and his Confederates are able to install their Fidel Castro-like hero into the presidency of this small fictional Latin American country called San Marcos. And he gives a big speech and he says, silence! I am the president of San Marcos. I have to change our underwear every half hour. And now you have to wear it on the outside so that we can check. And that the official language of San Marcos is now Swedish. And everyone's like, this guy gone mad. I felt like that when I heard about Maduro, him sort of declaring in court, I am the president of Venezuela. Well, dude, you're in court. You've been sleeping in a prison cell in the Bronx or Brooklyn or wherever the heck he is. I think it's the Bronx. You're not the president of Venezuela anymore. In fact, your vice president is now apparently the president, but we can talk about that. I don't know who is running the show down there. Trump said that we were going to run things, and that kind of set me on edge. Like, we're going to run another country. We can't even run the post office. There's all sorts of things that we can't do as a government, but we're supposed to run another country. I don't know about that. And so I thought about Woody Allen's Bananas when I heard about Maduro's declaration in court, but I also thought about Donald Trump, because obviously Donald Trump said one thing when he was on the campaign trail, and he's governed in a very surprising way. And I think pleasing to some Republicans who are kind of longing for that post-Cold War Bush-style foreign policy, and to get along, they all pretended they were MAGA. And all of a sudden, Trump he had said with America First, and quite clearly, bombing Iran, bombing Syria, bombing, I think, Yemen, talking about the overthrow of the Iranian government, getting involved pretty heavily in the Israeli Hamas conflict, getting involved very heavily in the Ukraine-Russia conflict as a peacemaker, which is a good thing. And these actions in the Caribbean without congressional authorization, it makes me think that this is a very different Donald Trump. A lot of people talk about presidents growing in office, and I don't know if this is Trump growing in office. It reminds me of what Stan Evans used to say, that a lot of people denounce Washington as a what did he say? That it was a swamp, and they find it more like a hot tub when they get in it. Something like that. I think it was something different from a swamp, but they think of it as a swamp, or they talk about it as a swamp. But once they get to Washington, they behave as though it's like a hot tub. And I'm wondering if that's happening with Donald Trump right now. I'm here on a little bit of a mission. I have some ash, and as you see, we're covered in snow. It's about 30 degrees. It's not that bad right now. I dumped the ash, but you got to dump the ash like days after you use it. You can't dump it that day because that ash has fire in it. So I used this ash, I don't know, a week and a half ago. But part of the reason I dump it on the road is I want this stuff to melt. And this is sort of the driveway coming up. I know it's not going to melt now, but you get some black stuff in the on the road here, and it will facilitate that. And later it gives grip. Sometimes I use ash. If the car is in ice, I will use the ash to get the car out of the ice. But there's certain sort of low-key uses for ash. It's not like tremendously useful. Anyway, mission accomplished there. And I think also mission accomplished in Venezuela. I don't want to knock it so much because this guy, he was a bit of a neighborhood bully. He oppressed his own people. He was this sort of, he had imported these 19th century European arcane Marxist views into his country, and he imposed them. In Venezuela, I don't know, in the 1970s, maybe even early 1980s, it was one of the wealthiest countries in the Western Hemisphere. And now it's one of the poorest. And the major reason for that, I mean, there's all sorts of complex reasons for all sorts of things, but the major reason for that is a communist named Hugo Chavez took over that country, I think, about 25 years ago, I think late 1990s, early 2000s. And this guy, Maduro, who, boy, he looks like he's 6'3". He looks every bit of it, too. He's a big man. He was a bus driver. He's a high school dropout. Somehow he became president of his country. And I don't know that this is the most enlightened character that I've ever come across. And the allegation is that he was involved in, turning Venezuela into more of a narco state, into more of kind of what we conceive of as Colombia. And a lot of times these Marxists, their schemes don't quite work out. And so they said, what are we going to do to bring in money? Well, drugs is a pretty easy way to do that, particularly if you're in South America. And so it's a good thing that Maduro's gone. I'm a little bit confused about, if you're going to do it, why didn't they just kick out the vice president too? The vice president is now Maduro's vice president is now the president. I don't know how long that's going to last, but why didn't you put Machado in? By all accounts, she won the election, or at least her stand-in won the election last time around. There's some goofy reporting saying that Trump is jealous of her because she won the Nobel Prize, and he coveted that. I don't believe that's true. I mean, I don't think he's that petty. But I think the reason they didn't, just overthrow the entire government, I mean, there's probably prudential reasons for that, because it's, oftentimes it's better to not have a revolution, just have a sort of stable transfer of power. I think with these people, because they were never legitimately vested with the power, it would have been good to sort of get rid of them all if you're going to do it. I don't know how I feel about us going in there. I'll talk about that later. But if you're going to do it, why not kick these people out too? And at least set up some elections, or at least put in Machado, or the people who had won the last election. Trump didn't do that. I think it's a little bit like, sometimes you see people, they're very like holier than thou or something. I don't, they declare that they don't read those magazines, like, I don't even know if they exist anymore, like High Society and Swank and Hustler, but then they'll have a big stack of the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition and a bunch of lingerie catalogs. And it's like, dude, it's sort of a distinction without a difference. We all know what you're doing. And I almost think it's the same thing with the Trump administration here, that they're saying, oh no, this wasn't a regime change because we kept this lady in power. I mean, but if you're going to do that, if you're going to violate your stated principles and start knocking off governments and overthrowing people, why not just go the full Monty and kick them out? I mean, if you're looking at women, why are you pretending you're holier than thou when you're looking at women with like a tiny little article of clothing on, and you're better than the guy that's looking at them, in their birthday suit or something like that? That's, I think, what's going on. It's a distinction without a difference. They're trying to justify their actions with their principles. They're trying to mesh these two things together. I don't know that they mesh together. I'm not saying that what we did was a bad thing. Like I said, most Americans are outcome-oriented, but I am saying it's a diversion from the stated principles of Donald Trump circa 2015. And Donald Trump circa 2026 is very different. He's grown in office, maybe. I hope not. I hope not, because I think that's the one thing about Trump. One of the things about Trump that I like the best is his view on foreign policy. And the last year has kind of challenged that view. And we'll see. We'll see what he does in 2026. We'll see how the outcome is with Venezuela and some of these other hotspots in the world. It's not that we shouldn't intervene in some capacity in some other nations. It's not, we're not pacifists. It's just that for a long time, conservatives bought into this liberal mindset that the state could be used for all sorts of good, to solve all sorts of problems. They may not have believed it in the United States, but they certainly believed it overseas. We're going to continue the conversation. We talked about the analogy with Bananas, the Woody Allen movie. It's not just movies. I mean, you can look at literature. Rather famously, Lord of the Rings, there's the issue of the ring. And when people don't have the ring, they realize how dangerous it is. They realize that having one man with all that power is not such a good thing. But once you have that ring, all of a sudden, you think, you start saying like that guy in, precious. So whether you're Gollum or you're Gandhi or you're Gandalf, it doesn't matter who you are. That ring in anyone's hand, it's sort of, to me, the big message of Lord of the Rings is what Lord Acton says, that power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I'm wondering about, perhaps I'm making too big of a deal with Donald Trump having a more, foreign policy that you would see with Obama, you would see with George W. Bush or H.W. Bush or Clinton. A tree just fell. So this tree used to be, last time I was here, this tree was standing. And last week or so, it fell. There's been some storms, so I don't know if the wind took it down. Usually root problems and things like that take trees down. And it's actually good for me, because that's what I'm doing right now. I'm going to cut some wood. That wood is too green for me to cut. But, you have enough trees fall, you're going to have some aged wood. Within a year or two, you maybe cut it. I have a humongous tree down that I still cut wood from, and it came down, I think, in 2019, and it's still there, and it's still providing me wood because it was one of the larger trees on the property. Unfortunately, it's a pine, and pine wood is, I just don't value it as much as other wood as far as making fires. That's what I'm doing now, is coming out to make a fire. A little bit of a stream that I just walked across, got stuck in. But getting back to the subject, maybe I'm making it too big of a deal of it, but I wonder to what degree, when principle doesn't undergird politics, you see people switch in an instant. So everyone who thought that there was going to be this new era of America First foreign policy, and we were going to revert from the George W. Bush type foreign policy, kind of spreading democracy, kind of what do they call it, hard-Wilsonianism, or kind of a little bit like Jimmy Carter with all this belief in human rights. That stuff was on, that was castles made of sand. That was stuff on soft foundations, because the moment we get into a war overseas or someone messes with us, all of the people that sounded like Smedley Butler all of a sudden start sounding like John O'Sullivan, that Manifest Destiny, pole to pole, Atlantic to Pacific newspapermen from the 19th century. They start to sound very differently. And I notice a lot of the people that were railing on George W. Bush's foreign policy in the first Trump term, rightfully so, I think, are now they're now making justifications for what Trump did. And it's not just, we don't just find antecedents in literature and in movies. I think TV shows as well. I mean, is this the moment that Trump jumped the shark? I don't know. Is it, there's this moment, in Happy Days, and this is for the people that are a little bit slow to things. In Happy Days, there was a moment when Fonzie, in his leather jacket, jumped a shark in water skis. I don't know if they were on Lake Michigan or whatever lake was out in Milwaukee where they were. Lake Minnetonka, I forget the two lakes in Madison. They have those two lakes there. I don't know where they were. They may have had a group trip to Hawaii or California or something like that. Anyways, he jumped the shark, and everyone thought, this show is goofy. It's going downhill. And there's all those moments in television, like when the Brady Bunch brought in Cousin Oliver. That's a surefire, sign of desperation. We're in ratings free fall. We've got to do something. Let's bring in a cute kid. And maybe that lasts, maybe for like a week or two, the ratings improve. They did that on Different Strokes. They brought in that redheaded kid. All sorts of shows. They bring in new people and try to breathe new life into the show. I think for the Facts of Life, they had, it was a fine show when it was all, at least when you were a little kid, it was a fine show when they were schoolgirls. And I particularly liked the first season when they had all these different schoolgirls, Molly Ringwald and all those other girls. And then they would just winnowed it down to those four girls. Then all of a sudden they worked in like a store. They ceased going to school because they get old. The show is still popular. So they work at some store. And then Mrs. Garrett leaves and they have some other lady. Those are the episodes I can't watch that show. And so the analogy is with Trump, are we sort of getting to that point where Trump is bringing in the cute redheaded kid or Cousin Oliver with the glasses, or he's being Fonzie jumping the shark? Because there's been so much the last year on foreign policy where he is exercising power. He, bombing Iran, bombing Yemen, bombing Syria, overthrowing the president of Venezuela. It's been a rather robust exercise of foreign policy. And I think most Americans, I look at process. And I think, constitutionally, is it right that one man who doesn't have this power vested in him constitutionally is exercising it? I mean, he has the power to declare war or anything like that. People will point to the War Powers Act. And the War Powers Act, that was put in to restrain the president. That was put in 1973 by a Democratic Congress, after Watergate, at the tail end of the Vietnam War, to rein in the presidency, to rein in the supposed imperial presidency. It wasn't put in there to make his powers like ever elastic. And yet people are citing the War Powers Act to say, oh, he can do anything he wants. Well, I don't know that the War Powers Act supersedes the Constitution. And besides that, the War Powers Act was never intended to make the presidency have unlimited powers. It was with regard to foreign policy, it was to sort of rein them in and to have Congress come in there. But, like so many other things, Congress has sort of ceded away its power. It ceded away its power to coin money. It ceded away its power to legislate to the bureaucracies, particularly to regulate, and it ceded its power on foreign policy to the presidency. So I don't, I think at least with regard to precedent, there's a lot of people that have done a lot worse than what Trump did in Venezuela. And I don't think Americans really care the way I care about process. I think they care about outcomes. And if you look at outcomes, it looks pretty good, at least right now. I mean, Maduro was a bad guy. He's out, and he's going to face justice. You're not going to have too many people thumbing their nose at the United States. They know that Trump means business. He's unpredictable. You don't know what he's going to do. They thought he was predictable in the first term because he was America first, but it turns out he's not predictable. And maybe that turns out for the good. I don't know. But right now, the question I'm asking is this going to, taint this guy? It's kind of like Nixon going to China in a way. I mean, he came in, I don't want to say he came in an isolationist. He certainly came in with, keep your powder dry kind of guy. And his second term is very different. It's a very robust exercise of American power, and I just don't want it to come back to bite him, because the way it came back to bite us post-Cold War, we're certainly a weaker nation relative to other nations with what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq. And if you ask yourself, if these interventions are all that great, how's Somalia doing right now? Remember when we intervened in Somalia in the early 1990s? How's that doing now? Do we do a good job there? How about Haiti? Haiti's a great country now. We intervened in Haiti under Clinton's presidency. We came in to overthrow the Taliban, to get bin Laden and all that kind of thing. Who's in power in Afghanistan now? So unfortunately, conservatives, like liberals on domestic policy, conservatives on foreign policy, think that the government can solve all sorts of problems. I think this is rather utopian, and I hope, we talked about TV and movies and literature. Let's have a professional wrestling analogy to close it out. I hope this is not Donald Trump making a heel turn. This is not Donald Trump. I remember watching, I don't know, it was NWA or what they called it, the Mid-South or Mid-Atlantic. They had Magnum TA when I was a kid. He was dressed up as a policeman with like a policeman visor on, and he was with a bunch of other policemen, and you just thought he was a policeman protecting. I don't know if he was protecting Nikita Koloff or Ric Flair or whoever he was protecting. And then Magnum TA pops out, and he starts beating the bag out of the guy. That wasn't a heel turn because Magnum TA was a face. But you have these events in professional wrestling where like Paul Orndorff will like, or Roddy Piper will turn heel on Paul Orndorff, and or he was already heel, but he will turn on his friend, or Shawn Michaels will super kick Marty Jannetty. Is this Donald Trump, tearing off his luchador mask and revealing I was George W. Bush all along? I hope not. I hope not, because I think there were a lot of lessons that, Bush may have done some good things. I think he was not a very good president, either of the Bushes, particularly the son. But on foreign policy, I think it was a disaster because it was guided by utopian ideas. And I don't want Trump to be seduced by any of these ideas. I don't want him to be seduced by the idea that America can go about the world righting wrongs and wearing a cape and being Team America World Police. I worry we're getting to that point. I don't know if we are. I mean, a lot of this stuff has turned out for the good, like I said, but I don't want, if there's a lasting impact of the Trump presidency, I would want it to be judges, first of all, constitutional judges. But secondly, I would want a reversal on foreign policy from, I think, the post-Cold War neo-Wilsonianism adopted by a lot of the Republicans, Romney, Bush, McCain, all those nominees. Trump, the reason why Trump won in 2016 is he said, I'm not one of those guys. I'm not one of those guys. So if we find out in the next 3 years that he was one of those guys all along, hey, count me out. But let's wait and see.